Hi guys, guess what? I have Loki here, my silly little puppy. He's also with me right now in my sunroom full of animals. You guys should be looking at this. Look at this Evelyn go. She's so busy. I think she got that cricket the last time I was with you. Callie is still chilling out, and so is Timothy. And last time I was with you, we were reading Winn Dixie, Chapter 1. Winn Dixie, written by one of my favorite children's authors. Here we go, Chapter 2. That summer I found Winn Dixie was also the summer me and the preacher moved to Naomi, Florida, so he could be the new preacher at the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi. My daddy is a good preacher and a nice man, but sometimes it's hard for me to think about him as my daddy because he spends so much time preaching or thinking about preaching or getting ready to preach. And so in my mind, I think of him as the preacher. Before I was born, he was a missionary in India, and that is how I got my first name. But he calls me by my second name, Opal, because that was his mother's name, and he loved her a lot. Anyway, while me and Winn Dixie walked home, I told him how I got my name, and I told him how I had just moved to Naomi. I also told him about the preacher and how he was a good man, even if he was too distracted with sermons and prayers and suffering people to go grocery shopping. But you know what? I told Winn Dixie, you are a suffering dog, so maybe he'll take you too right away. Maybe he'll want to keep you. Winn Dixie looked at me and wagged his tail. He was kind of limping like something was wrong with one of his legs. And I have to admit, he stunk bad. He was an ugly dog, but already I loved him with all my heart. When we got to the Friendly Corners trailer park, I told Winn Dixie that he had to behave right and be quiet because this was all adult trailer park, and the only reason I got to live in it was because the preacher was a preacher and I was a good, quiet kid. I was what the Friendly Corners trailer park manager, Mr. Alfred, called an exception. And I told Winn Dixie he had to act like an exception too. Specifically, I told him not to pick any fights with Mr. Alfred's cats or Mrs. Detweiler's little yappy Yorkie dog, Samuel. Winn Dixie looked up at me while I was telling him everything, and I swore he understood. Sit, I told him when we got to my trailer. He sat right down. He's got good manners. Stay here. I'll be right back. The preacher was sitting in the living room, working at a little fold-out table. He had papers spread all around him, and he was rubbing his nose, which means he was thinking really hard. Daddy? Daddy, you know how you always tell me that we should help those less fortunate than ourselves? He rubbed his nose and looked around at his papers. Well, I found a less fortunate at the grocery store. Is that right? Yes, sir. I stared at the preacher real hard. Sometimes he reminded me of a turtle hiding inside its shell in there thinking about things and not ever sticking his head out into the world. Daddy, I was wondering, could this less fortunate, could he stay with us for a while? Finally, the preacher looked up at me. Opal, what are you talking about? Well, I found a dog and I want to keep him. No dogs. We've talked about this. You don't need a dog. I know it. I know I don't need a dog, but this dog needs me. Look. I went to the trailer door and hollered, Winn Dixie! Winn Dixie's ears shot up in the air and he grinned and sneezed, and then he came limping up the steps into the trailer and put his head right into the preacher's lap, right on top of the pile of papers. That preacher looked up at Winn Dixie, and he looked at his ribs and his matted fur and the places where he was bald. The preacher's nose wrinkled. Like I said, the dog smelled pretty bad. Winn Dixie looked up at the preacher. He pulled back his lips and showed that preacher all of his crooked yellow teeth and wagged his tail and knocked some of those preacher's papers right off the table. Then he sneezed and some more papers fluttered to the floor. What did you call this dog? The preacher asked. Winn Dixie. I was afraid to say it. I could see that Winn Dixie was having a good effect on the preacher. He was making him poke his head out of his shell. Well, he's a stray if I've ever seen one. He put down his pencil and scratched Winn Dixie behind the ears. And a little unfortunate too, that's for sure. Are you looking for a home? The preacher asked. Winn Dixie wagged his tail. Well, I guess you found one. Winn Dixie's got a home. See you guys later.